Joan Esposito, live.
Celebrating our power to bring about change.
Local.
Everybody has to work together.
And progressive.
I think you get the idea.
On WCPT 820.
At first we were afraid, we were petrified, kept thinking we could never live without you by our side. And we spent so many nights thinking how you did us wrong. Now we've banded all together. Your tariff made us strong, and so you know you're not so great. There's not a snowball's chance in hell we'll be your 51st state. We should have told you this before. You don't believe this, but it's true. You really need our resources far more than we need you. So now just go. Walk out the door. We do not need you. You're not welcome anymore. Weren't you the one who instigated these trade fights? You'll soon grow to regret it when we turn out your lights. And we will survive as long as we can think and work. We know.
Hello. Thanks for being here this Tuesday, March 18th. That was Sonia Zabak singing, lyrics written by Gord Moran, produced by Wayne McFall, engineered by Ed Conley and Shay Bedard. I love what they have done with this song. You can look it up on social media. It goes on much longer. Talks about how we need their resources much more than they need us. And that is a particularly poignant song today because news has broken not all that long ago. One of the newsletters that I follow, The Hand Basket, got a copy of an executive order that is supposed to be released sometime this week that declares fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction, that Donald Trump is going to write an executive order that says the flow of illicit fentanyl into the United States through illicit distribution networks has created a national emergency. So, what does this mean? Well, there's the $64,000 question. Some people are saying that an executive order declaring fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction would allow the president, or potentially allow the president to think that they could declare some sort of emergency and that it might be the justification for our military invading either Mexico or Canada. Yep. This is not the first time this idea has been floated. It was suggested to Biden. He didn't want to do it. I think Lauren Boebert tried to get it before Congress. Congress didn't act on it. But Donald Trump seems to think that this executive order is a good idea. And who knows in his own mind what kind of power he thinks this bestows upon him. So, yeah, there's that. There's that. And in a little while, we're also going to be talking about, there's a couple other big stories of the day. One is that Donald Trump is saying that he had a phone call with Vladimir Putin, and Putin agreed to pause, not a across-the-board ceasefire, but Putin agreed to pause attacks on infrastructure and particularly anything to do with the energy grid in Ukraine. Putin, by the way, has apparently an entire list of concerns of other things that he wants. There's been rumors that Trump's trying to float this idea to Putin that Crimea, which Putin invaded in 2014 and took over, that it may be, here's the deal. Here's what we'll do, Vlad. We'll say Crimea is a part of Russia. It's not Crimea. It's not Ukraine. It's not anything. It's Russia. And if we give you the official rights to Crimea, maybe you could pack up all your soldiers and go home. Do you really think that's going to satisfy Vladimir Putin? I kind of don't. Call me crazy. Call me wacky. I kind of don't. If you should really subscribe to The Guardian U.S. We know The Guardian was a UK-based paper. It came to this country, and I've got to tell you, it is doing a bang-up job. As you know from what I've shared with you, I've canceled my Washington Post subscription, not because of a protest, because, you know, when Bezos killed the Kamala Harris endorsement, I didn't cancel my subscription. When Bezos killed the political cartoon that poked fun at him, I didn't cancel my subscription. But Bezos telling the editorial page what they can and can't write, that caused me to cancel my subscription. And here's why. Not because I think this is just some sort of protest and that my canceling my subscription is going to make, you know, Jeff Bezos boo-hoo-hoo all the way home, but because I'm now concerned. I'm now concerned that Bezos will not exert his influence over the news gathering side of the paper. Heck, even their restaurant reviewer, they still have a guy who reviews restaurants. Is Bezos going to get upset if there's a restaurant that Trump likes that gets a bad review? Is Bezos going to let the editors know, hey, this is Donald Trump has just bought a share of this restaurant. We better get out there and review it, and the review better be good? I don't trust the other parts of the Washington Post like I used to. The Washington Post that kept track of Trump's lies, that adopted the banner, democracy dies in darkness, that Washington Post seems to me to be gone. I don't know if you follow George Conway on social media, but he was pointing out a headline recently that was one of those, one of those headlines that soft pedals. It said something like, Trump has plans for the economy, but he's not very good at explaining them. Yeah. That kind of sop to Trump, I used to see it in other places, but not the Washington Post. That was a Washington Post headline. It shocked George Conway enough that he posted it, and he was like, what the hell's going on at the Washington Post? I'm now concerned. Even if there hasn't been an explicit directive from Bezos, I am concerned that the people who remain in positions of power, they obviously know what their owner wants. And I think that from now on, the headlines that are written and the sorts of stories that reporters are sent out on are going to be something that wasn't as fact-based as it used to be. I think the Washington Post, I think Bezos is using the Washington Post to suck up to Trump so that Blue Origin can get government contracts. And I've canceled my subscription because I'm not sure. Was that headline written with no interference, or was a certain headline written in a softer way than it otherwise would have been because nobody wants to make Donald Trump mad? And if you have those kinds of questions about a reporting organization, what's the point? What's the point of wasting your time with them? So but I still need someplace that's going to bring me all the news of the nation and the world. And I have found that the Guardian U.S. I'm also thinking of re-upping my subscription to USA Today. I bought a subscription when they hired Rex Hupke, but then it lapsed. And I honestly can't say one way or the other whether or not I think they're doing a great job. There are lots of little places, lots of like The Nation, Washington Monthly, Mother Jones, ProPublica. There are tons of places. Judd Legum. There are independent folks who are doing a really good job. Jim Acosta is now out on his own. People who will not be pressured into softening something or making it more palatable. People who you can trust. And I no longer feel confident that the Washington Post is going to bring me an unvarnished perspective. So The Guardian, they have an article on this whole Putin Trump thing. At 3 o'clock, I'm going to talk with Joel Ostro about that some more, see what he thinks about all this. But here's an article. As I was looking up to see what was going on with Putin and Trump, I saw this headline. Tesla stake is no longer Elon Musk's most valuable asset amid stock market sell-off. Elon Musk's vast stake in Tesla is no longer his most valuable asset as the electric car company continues to endure a sharp stock market sell-off. SpaceX is now the billionaire tycoon's largest asset for the first time in 5 years. He's still the richest man in the world, according to Forbes magazine. But he ain't getting that money from Tesla anymore. And if Tesla did not have a rubber stamp board, some big corporations, especially ones that have been around for a long time, they actually have a board of directors of people who are there to keep an eye on what the company's doing and flag anything that they think is hurting the company. That's an independent board of directors. That's not what Tesla has. Tesla has a board of directors that when Elon Musk says jump, they turn and they say, how high? How high, Mr. Musk, do you want us to jump? Any other company that was losing value the way Tesla is losing value, and that loss of value could be directly tied to the actions of the CEO. Can you imagine another company tolerating that? No. 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 So, I sure hope he's enjoying his time taking apart the country that gave him freaking everything. And I hope that he continues to lose money. I hope that his companies continue to lose value. It's pretty hard for Donald Trump to prop up Tesla, even though he had Elon Musk bring a bunch of Teslas and put them on the White House lawn and walk around with Trump. Oh, this is a great car. I love this red one. And Musk said, oh, it's like a golf cart that goes really, really fast. And Donald Trump sat in the driver's seat and goes, oh, it's all computery. So anyway, there's that good news. In the Guardian U.S., theguardian.com/US-news. Look it up. The Guardian is one of those news sites, much like the Sun-Times, where you can read a lot of what they do without paying. They believe that the news is too important to put behind a paywall. I have a subscription because I want to support their work, and journalism costs money. So there. This morning, more going on. more going on. This morning, our governor, J.B. Pritzker, spoke at a meeting put on by the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Ooh, J.B. Pritzker. Yes, I think I have time to play all of this. He was on fire. First, I want to start off with, he talked about, and he's talked about this before, of what it was like during the first Trump term and the deal that was offered him for Trump to provide medical equipment and PPE to the state of Illinois. First, he talks about it was like back then. Listen to this.
During Donald Trump's first term, when COVID was running rampant, we governors begged him to help us. Begged. The President of the United States has the unique power to invoke the Defense Production Act. It's a law designed to ensure the supply of materials and services for national defense during crises. We needed masks and ventilators to save people's lives that were dying in our hospitals. And U.S. companies were price gouging, and I called many of them myself and talked to the CEOs. They were price gouging state and local governments, police and firefighters, hospitals and clinics. He could have fought for us. He really could have. Instead, he made self-serving deals. He would send life-saving equipment if only we would agree to praise him on the Sunday talk shows. That is literally a deal that he put in front of me. I was desperate. My hospitals were filling up, and time was of the essence. So I agreed that I would do that if he sent me what we needed. Because my job at the time was to do virtually anything to get the White House to help us save lives. Needless to say, he never delivered for us. He never delivered for the American people. And Donald Trump proved who he really is in that critical moment.
That was then. And immediately after he made those comments to the Center for American Progress Action Fund, he talked about what it's like now. That was then. This is now. Listen to this.
Is it incompetence or is it treachery? Which one? In 2025, he's proving it's both. Americans are experiencing the cruelty that comes with authoritarian rule. Donald Trump has handed over the reins of power to Elon Musk and his fellow Doge bags so that they can find trillions of dollars that they need to give themselves a massive tax break. Think about that. What Musk and Trump are doing isn't about efficiencies or about cost savings. It is about cruelty. They're intentionally breaking the system and giving themselves the authority to rebuild it in their own interest. They've shut down cancer research and investments in cures for diabetes and Alzheimer's. They've eliminated safe drinking water regulations and allowed companies unfettered ability to pollute the air their employees and all of us breathe. Homeless veterans have lost the support that they were getting to rebuild their lives. Seeing a doctor at the VA hospital has now become a luxury for them. Tariffs designed to help pay for tax breaks for the wealthy have now raised taxes on the middle class and working class. The price of tomatoes and lettuce and beer at the grocery store is up. And people are literally smuggling eggs across the border from Mexico because they can't find them or they're not affordable at their local grocery stores. And congressional Republicans are aiming at eliminating health care coverage for working families. It's a foregone conclusion unless the Senate Republicans defy Trump, and there's a fat chance of that happening. There's no grand master strategy to improve the lives of everyday Americans. This is true villainous cruelty by a few idiots who are trying to figure out how to pull off the scam of their lives. They're armed with the power of the presidency, and their sights are aimed on working people, many of whom voted for them, never imagining what this would turn out to be.
Our governor, speaking this morning, hasn't officially declared a run for president in 2028, but he sure is out and about and saying all the right things. One other, I know it just keeps coming. Usually I take a look at all the things happening during a day, and I try to whittle it down to 2 or 3 things. I'm not doing so well on that today. One other news item, and, you know, if I were more of an optimist, I'd say, wow, this is the good news of the day. This is the silver lining. I want to say those things, but I just can't. Donald Trump has shown a willingness to ignore court orders, most famously his lawyers who were ordered by a judge to return the Venezuelan immigrants that were being flown to El Salvador, being ordered to turn those planes around, and they didn't. And then there was another hearing, and they claimed to kind of not know what was going on. And then the judge scheduled another hearing. Why he doesn't put those lawyers in jail for contempt is anybody's guess at this point. Trump is ignoring the judiciary. Homan, his border czar, one of the more evil people alive today, said that he doesn't care. He does not care what judges rule. Doesn't matter to him. Doesn't matter to him what judges rule. He knows what he's going to do, and he's going to do it. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, actually made a statement about that. It's pretty unusual for the Supreme Court, especially the Chief Justice, to ever make statements publicly. But he basically said that... one of the judge that ruled against Trump said he should be impeached. That judge should be impeached. John Roberts said in part, quote, "For more than 2 centuries, it's been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose." John Roberts, in a rare public, I don't know, do you think it's strong enough that we can call it a rebuke of Trump? And, it would be great to think that the Supreme Court sees that they're now dealing with a president who wants to make them utterly irrelevant, wants to turn them into just a rubber stamp for whatever he wants to do. So how will they react to that? Will they stand up against it and try to maintain their legitimacy and their relevancy? Or will they be so worried that Trump will humiliate them by not following one of their orders and making them look as powerless as Trump truly believes they are? Will they not want the bad publicity about, Supreme Court said this, but Donald Trump isn't doing it? And in a case like that, will they agree with Trump just so they can save face? These are all very good questions that will be answered in the very near future. Let's get those phone lines open. Paul Shavari is ready to take your calls. 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. Call, text. We're going to talk after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Got some really interesting comments coming through on the text line. I want to share some of that with you. Joan, as someone who thought the world of Paul Simon, I'm very disappointed in Dick Durbin, his understudy. I expected much more of him, especially now. This may sound controversial, but I'd like to see Illinois Dems draft Adam Kinzinger for the Senate. He's shown himself to be a vocal, principled leader even now. You've interviewed him several times. What are your thoughts, Andy in Evanston? Well, actually, Andy, I haven't interviewed Adam Kinzinger. I've reached out to him more times than I can shake a stick at, but have gotten no response. I talked to Joe Walsh, the former Tea Party congressman. I talk to him all the time, and I think he is on the verge of putting a D in front of his name, and he's certainly a fighter. And the other thing is Adam Kinzinger no longer lives in Illinois. He moved to Texas. His wife's family is in Texas, and he has moved, I believe he is in Houston proper or in the Houston area, and that is where he now lives. I don't think Joe Walsh, I've been talking to him for years, and he's always like, no, never be a Dem, never to be a Dem. The last time I talked to Joe Walsh, he said he was seriously considering joining the Democratic Party. Adam Kinzinger has never expressed that desire. And remember, I think Adam Kinzinger, I think he's smart. I think he's principled. But remember, when he was in Congress during Trump's first administration, and he voted along party lines. I mean, just like Liz Cheney, I admire the heck out of Liz Cheney. I think she is an incredibly principled human being. But if you look at Kinzinger's and Cheney's voting record, it is not what we would call liberal at all. At all. After her break with the Republican Party, Liz Cheney, the only thing that she changed her stance on and publicly apologized about was her stance on gay marriage. Some people believe that she opposed gay marriage because she was in Wyoming and it's a very conservative state, but she has a sister who's gay. And that did not promote family harmony. One sister turning basically her back on her other sister for political gain. And after she was kicked out of the Republican Party, she said the only thing she would do different and the only vote she would take differently is that from the beginning she would have been a supporter of gay marriage. So I do admire these people. I admire their courage. I admire their principles. I wish some of the Republicans currently in office would find that kind of bravery. But their fear is that they will not be Republicans in office very long, if indeed they do that. But remember, with the exception of Joe Walsh, who seems to be coming out of the dark into the light, Adam and Liz are still very conservative folks. But you know what? I admire him, Andy. It's Andy from Evanston. And if he would be willing to sit down and talk with me, I would love that. I talked to Ray LaHood. I talked to Pat Brady. I talked to Joe Walsh. I'm not afraid of talking to Republicans. I don't want Republicans who are going to come on the air and lie or try to convince me that, what I see isn't what I see. Somebody else texted in, I canceled my Amazon account the day I saw Jeff Bezos at the inauguration sitting by the president. That was it. I hear you. Regarding the Cybertruck, is a new text. Its Achilles heel will be the cast aluminum frame that will distort and crack over time. I just saw something about Cybertrucks. Right now, I believe they are not. There's a temporary pause on selling them because parts keep falling off. Good God. So anyway, somebody else, sometimes the text line is a little confusing for me. I can't pull up the text, but somebody else texted in about how they feel really lucky to live in the state of Illinois. They think the world of J.B. Pritzker, and they hope to God nothing happens to him because they consider J.B. Pritzker an absolute treasure. So I agree with that. Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Our good friend Jim is on the line from Chicago. Hey, Jim.
Hi, Joan. The sadistic nature of the Trump voter was partially satiated this week, showing 140 people, human beings, with their heads being shaved in irons, brought to El Salvador, both places, and he greedily, apparently was on the internet, ooh, I'm glad to take him down here. Mm-hmm. And defying a court order, of course. And then one attorney tried to explain, we don't know if any Americans were in this bunch.
Yeah, and that has happened. They have. ICE has. There was a story about ICE literally like doing like you see in the movies, pulling up next to somebody on the street and opening a panel van and throwing them in. The person was in ICE custody for 12 hours till they figured out that they were an American citizen, and then they released them. No police report, no nothing. Just you're out. You're out of here. It's unbelievable.
It was all theater. I mean, you saw this insane vehicle that they had. They had enough. They had more guards than they have prisoners. I don't know who's paying this thing. It's certainly a taxpayer. But the other thing is, how about when he says that Biden used the wrong pen to sign his
the January 6th pardons? Yes, Biden used an auto pen, which is something presidents use because they have to sign so many things. Yeah, and now they're saying, that invalidates them.
But Joan, who do you think came up with that idea? What genius acolyte that he has?
Who knows? Any pretext, any pretense. But you know what's potentially? Let me see if I can pull this up. Adam Kinzinger in his Substack today talked about the fact that he doesn't think that Donald Trump, like the big deal is, these people better be really afraid, I'm taking away their pardons. Here it is. Adam Kinzinger's Substack, and I don't know what it's called, but I'm sure if you Google his name and Substack, you can follow him. The title is "The Tantrum Tyrant Wants to Threaten Me." Cool, bro, bring it. Trump whines, complains, and threatens again. Bring it on, tiny man.
Good for him. Good for him. That's the attitude every well-thinking American should have. And I'm looking forward to your 3 o'clock test because he's one of the best, Joan. And thanks for taking my call, Joan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the call. I want to read a little bit more from Adam Kinzinger's Substack today. The truth is, he writes, Trump won't actually follow through on this. He never follows through on anything that takes actual courage. It's just another attempt to stoke fear, to look tough to his cultish followers while he cowers behind his endless grievances. If he actually had the guts to stand by his words, he wouldn't be whining on social media about how unfair life is. This is a good one. If you're ever going to start following Adam Kinzinger on Substack, start today. He wraps it up like this. So here's the channel. I'm sorry. I'm having a Monday mouth on Tuesday. Who knew? So here's the challenge, Donald. Quit your incessant whining, your pathetic victim act, and just do it. If you truly think you're strong enough, make your move. But we both know you won't, because deep down, even you know you're all talk. America deserves a leader, not a perpetual victim in chief. Either grow a spine or step aside. We are done listening to your complaints. Adam Kinzinger, on Substack responding to this Trump move, saying that all the January 6 committee pardons that Biden issued are not really valid because Biden didn't sign them individually. He used an auto pen. As I said before, it is standard procedure for presidents to do this because they have to sign so many darn things. And it has never, ever been questioned. It's just like the angry blonde woman who said, when she was asked, the judge who told the planes to turn around, the planes that had the immigrants, and he was like, no, this isn't valid right now. Turn those planes around. But when he wrote his written order, he didn't say turn the planes around in the written order. So the angry blonde woman is saying, well, he didn't write it. So we don't really think it's a valid order. It is, of course, a valid order. And not only did the two planes in the air with the immigrants on their way to El Salvador, not only did they not turn around, but a plane that hadn't taken off yet, a plane that had not taken off was sitting on U.S. soil when the judge issued this order and told the attorneys to pick up their phones and let people know right here, right now, this was not something that was going to go through. Somehow that message didn't get conveyed. And the plane that hadn't even taken off yet, that was sitting on American soil, later took off and took those alleged illegals to El Salvador. And apparently part of the way that they're determining people are gang members is if anybody has a tattoo. Not even a specific tattoo. Any tattoo. Front page story in the Tribune today. Families impacted by ICE raids denounce Trump's arrests. And there's a story of Abel Orozco, 47-year-old father from Southwest Suburban Lyons with no criminal record. And he was removed in an ICE raid. It was supposed to be the bad guys, wasn't it? The terrorists, the gang members, the criminals? Not a 47-year-old father from Southwest Suburban Lyons with no criminal record? We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more of your calls and more of your texts right after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
We spend the first hour of every day talking about the big news of the day and taking your calls, reading your texts. I've got some interesting texts. Not all, I've said this before. People kind of let their freak flag fly on the text line. Not all of them are suitable for radio, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy them anyway. So I'm just going to let you guess what I'm chortling about right now. Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Our good friend Ron is on the line from Michigan. Hey, Ron, how are you?
Hi, Joan. Good, Joan. Joan, earlier you were talking about Trump possibly invading Canada or Greenland. I think he is going to invade, but it's going to be Cuba. And the reasons for that are, number one, Cuba just experienced its second total blackout of the island. And I say that at this time, Cuba said it was the meddling of the United States that did it. And this is prelude to the United States getting ready for the invasion of Cuba, because this would also help secure his dream of taking back Panama Canal. And Cuba, of course, he always used the excuse there's communists there, they're base for Chinese, this, that, and the other thing. But how they're going to do it is like they did Noriega's Panama, where we didn't hear very much about it, even though there was news reporting of it, where stealth bombers went into Barrio that was totally Noriega supported, and they carpet bombed the whole thing. And there was massive. Check it out. You could read about it, but
the only question I have about that is. Cuba has always had a very strong relationship with Russia. As a matter of fact, up until a few years ago, Russian food exports to Cuba were keeping basically everybody in Cuba was pretty happy with the way things were because they were getting all this food from Russia and it was affordable. And then, Russia went into tough economic times and the food was harder to get. And then there was a little more unrest in Cuba. But Cuba has always been close, very close to Russia. Do you really think Donald Trump would invade a country that even just historically has been associated with his favorite strongman?
Trump and Putin may make a deal. That's very good you brought that up. And they would share the beaches and the casinos of Cuba. So, there's a very interesting thing because, yes, the Russians were supportive of the Castro and Raul's regime and still are perhaps, but they're weakened greatly by their war with Ukraine. So I think it would be more of a deal split between Putin and Trump to take over the island. And the Cubans would fight, but that's why there would be a massive secret bombing campaign that would eliminate any resistance.
I do think Donald Trump is aching, even though he prides himself on being the guy who stops conflict. I think he likes the idea of invading somebody somewhere, or at least threatening to. I just don't know. I mean, he'd have to get Vladimir Putin's permission. You're absolutely right about that. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it unless he got Vladimir Putin's okay. But it's an interesting idea. And when he signs these executive orders, saying that fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction, that immediately puts Canada and Mexico in the crosshairs. And I don't know. I don't know. He likes to bluff and bluster, but you discount his words at your peril because the ones you think he'll never do, suddenly he's doing. Ron, thank you so much for the call.
You're welcome, Joan.
Appreciate it. Let's go to Dubuque, where Dan is on the line. Hey, Dan, thank you so much for the call today.
Of course, we moved to Iowa in part to help change it to a blue state. Where we live is actually very blue. Indivisible has a chapter there, and I want people to know that they're welcome to come to Iowa to help us. But I want to talk about John Roberts. He joined the majority opinion on a case where they granted the president unlimited immunity for official acts. Now, a lot of experts, including Larry, I can't think of his name because it doesn't come to me right now, I said, look, they're not even going to grant this cert. The decision from the appellate court is so reasoned, cited, and apparent on its face. There's no reason for the Supreme Court to weigh in. They could just walk away from this. But instead, of course, the ideologues on the court took it, and John Roberts sided with them. He could have not voted. He could have voted against the majority, but he didn't do that. Now, all of a sudden, he realizes that they may become irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Remember, Jackson's one of his favorite presidents, and Jackson said, okay, so they made the ruling, let them enforce it.
That's right, and that's how we got the Trail of Tears, because the Supreme Court said you can't do that massive relocation of indigenous people. And Andrew Jackson basically said, screw you.
Yes, and people keep screaming, what are the Democrats going to do? What are the courts going to do? The police officers, the marshals, Secret Service, FBI, Department of, all of those people with badges and guns work for the executive branch. And so...
Well, the U.S. Marshals are under the DOJ, which, of course, in this administration is part of the executive branch.
Right. So, but he's literally come out and said, we need to go after people that I don't like.
Yep, he has.
Because an independent DOJ, as toothless as it was, started to move towards going after Mr. Trump. And he thought that was at the direction of Mr. Biden, which I think was laughable at best, but they're never going to believe facts, or that a person would be so principled that he wouldn't, direct them to go after him. Bottom line is, Chief Justice Roberts, is too little, too late. And I'll be honest, I haven't done it because in this environment, I was through the same postcard, so they didn't have to go through that long vetting process. I'm just going to say, shame on you, resign. They should all resign. They're never going to. No, but
they're not.
What I don't understand is why contempt of court, which, by the way, is not, if my understanding, when a judge finds you in contempt, there is no appeal on that. The judge is the final word. Now,
and even if the lawyer just sits in jail for one night, I think it sends a message. I don't know. Have you noticed, even though Donald Trump says everybody is so unfair to him, it really does seem like our entire judicial system bends over backwards to give him and his lawyers second chances, third chances, four chances, much more so than any regular person would ever get. I don't understand when these lawyers are clearly stalling and defying the judge. If I were that judge, man, oh man, I'd be sorely tempted. Take the lead attorney, put him in jail, then ask the next attorney. So you got the information I need? No, sir. Okay, you're going to jail with your friend. Next attorney, you got the information I need? I don't know.
Well, I don't think that the secretaries of the various cabinet positions are immune in the same way that the Trump is. Marco Rubio, who I will not refer to as secretary, retweeted the emoji of a oops with a laughter emoji when they didn't turn the planes. Ooh, too late. That's not what a secretary of state is supposed to do. That's a story I read. My point is, you can't do anything to the president because he'll claim the immunity. Start throwing secretaries, cabinet secretaries, undersecretaries, and anybody who follows those orders into jail for contempt of court. It's fairly simple, but I guess there are different rules. I know when I was on that grand jury, we indicted a lot of people. Not too many people were in high places.
Yeah.
They were all low-level folks. And
Dan, I gotta wrap this up. I want to try to get another call in before we have to break for news. Thank you so much for your call, and I hope you can continue to keep the Dubuque, Iowa area blue for us. Let's go to Palos Park. Ed is on the line. Hello, Ed.
Yeah, hi, Joan. Thanks for taking my call. I have some additional comments regarding Adam Kinzinger. Initially, when Trump on his Truth Social talked about taking back the pardons or whatever, and then he had a comment on that. And then Adam Kinzinger came back, or he made some detrimental comments to Adam Kinzinger, and then Kinzinger came right back hard. I mean, he says, bring it on, You're a small man in a small body, Yep. And these are really some, statements that I'm sure Trump rarely hears. People are afraid of him, and they don't want to get back at him. So I think with Adam's fire, this should stimulate some people to get on the same bandwagon. Let's not just lay back and let Trump come out with all these statements and get away with it. It
is a breath of fresh air when somebody stands up to him so publicly. And I know Adam Kinzinger means every word of it. He said on Stephen Colbert, before the pardons had even been announced, he said, I don't want a pardon. He said, let him put me in jail. I'll fight him just as hard from jail as I would not in jail. And I think Donald Trump realizes that he could be creating a viable opposition to MAGA if he really gives somebody like Adam Kinzinger that kind of attention by making him a martyr. Anyway, I'm kind of up against the news, Ed. I got to wrap this up. But thank you so much for calling. Always appreciate it when you share your thoughts with us. Couple things I want to share real quick. One more text that I enjoyed. Somebody was wondering on the text line whether or not Trump auto-signed the 1,600 pardons he gave for the insurrectionists. Do you honestly think he signed his name to 1,600 separate documents? Be careful what you wish for, Donald Trump. And another thing, shortly after 4 o'clock Chicago time today, the 2 astronauts that have been stuck in space for 286 days, they are being returned today. Their craft should hit the atmosphere a little after 4 p.m., and it is estimated that they will be touching down at 4:57 today. After 286 days in space, after their craft, several crafts actually were deemed unsafe to bring them back. Let's go to the news. We'll be back with Joel Ostro after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Joining me once again is political science professor Joel Ostro from Benedictine University. He is an expert on all things Russia. We have been talking with him quite a bit as there seem to be developments that might lead to the end of the 3-year conflict. I say this tentatively because I'm not sure I believe it. But, of course, the news today is that supposedly on this phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, Putin agreed to pause any attacks on energy infrastructure or regular infrastructure. But he has a whole list of things that he wants to happen before there is any kind of permanent end to this. Joel, I know you've been following all this very closely. What do you think of these latest developments?
Well, thanks for having me on, Joan. Good to be with you again. What do I think about it? The conditions that Russia has imposed are not surprising, and they are certainly negate any hope for a full ceasefire, much less a peace. Those demands include a cessation of all military and even humanitarian aid to Ukraine. It's unclear whether that would just be the U.S. or somehow the U.S. would have to compel Europe to follow through. I really don't see that happening. At the same time, if Russia stops pounding Ukraine's energy infrastructure, that's certainly a good thing. In the context of everything else that's horrible. But, any targets that Russia would not aim at gives Ukraine fewer targets it needs to protect, and then a greater ability to shoot down the missiles and drones that are going after apartment buildings and such.
There was a report, I don't know how serious, that one of the ideas Donald Trump was going to float to Vladimir Putin was that Crimea officially be made a part of Russia, and that would satisfy Vladimir Putin, and so he would have his forces withdraw from all the other parts of Ukraine. But we would no longer call it Crimea. We would now call it, I don't know, Russia South or something. Do you think that is a deal that Vladimir Putin would accept in any way, shape, or form?
I had not heard that it would involve them withdrawing from the other territories.
Well, that was how they were supposed to end the war, was Crimea would be renamed Russia. But it didn't say that.
But what about the Donbass regions in eastern Ukraine?
The news item I saw didn't mention Donbass, didn't mention that whole strip along the border. It just said Crimea. Yeah. That's why I don't think it's really viable.
Yeah, and it's not really a strip. I mean, we're talking 15% of Ukraine's territory. Crimea, it's difficult. But the problem at the international level is Crimea is Ukraine's sovereign territory. And for Russia to take that territory through an act of unprovoked aggression is in violation of all of the norms of international law, the United Nations, and of modern civilization. And so to legitimize that would be disastrous. At the same time, it's hard to see Ukraine reclaiming that territory, and it's really hard to see the government of Ukraine formally acknowledging that outcome. It would have to receive a whole lot of concessions in return, and for Russia, having Crimea without eastern Ukraine makes it very difficult for it to access or protect, particularly given how badly it's been weakened in the Black Sea.
Well, protect it. Successes. I mean, would you really think it would be invaded? I mean, nobody is. It's been under Russian control since 2014. It's not like everybody's hot to take over Crimea, unless there's something going on that I am woefully.
I'm talking about Ukraine.
Oh, Ukraine. I thought you were talking about Crimea.
Which doesn't. Well, Crimea is part of Ukraine, so it depends on Ukraine's acceptance of those terms and what else would come with it. But part of Russia's whole venture in eastern Ukraine was to make Russia a contiguous territory, including Crimea, and that doesn't exist without eastern Ukraine. So that's the problem in terms of geography.
I know you've given this a lot of thought, Joel. What do you see as the end game here? What is going to have to happen? What agreements are going to have to be made for this to come to an end?
It's really hard to predict right now, Joan. What I had been saying for quite a while was based on the assumption that there would be no return of MAGA to power and a destruction of democracy in America and the Western Alliance. And had none of that happened, the assumption was the United States and its allies would continue to support Ukraine in the hopes that that they could outlast Putin and inflict enough damage that ultimately Putin's regime would collapse. Ultimately, there is no peace in Ukraine until the regime in Russia changes, just like there's no peace for the Palestinians until the Netanyahu government is gone, or for Israelis until Hamas is gone, frankly.
So the fact that we reelected Donald Trump, could that be enough of a power shift to bring about Ukraine's defeat?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. For sure. Because if the U.S. halts military assistance to Ukraine, Europe doesn't have the capacity right now to fill in, to make up for that. And Europe can agree to send all the weapons that it can, but that's not enough, certainly, to sustain Ukraine's air defenses, for example. And we already see that Ukraine is sparingly using the Patriots that it has left, and Russia's missiles and drones are wreaking more and more havoc by the day. It's not just that they're firing more, but it's more getting through and causing damage. So, yes, it's catastrophic for Ukraine.
Adam Kinzinger said in an interview recently that one of the many tragic aspects of Donald Trump being reelected was that Russia was on the verge of losing the war in Ukraine, that they had just been, their personnel had been devastated, their material was running out, and that one of the many sad things about the Trump reelection was that it might give new life to their war effort. Do you agree with all that?
Oh, yeah, 100%. If Harris had won and were in the Oval Office now, and the alliance would then have been stronger than ever, more resolute in support of Ukraine than ever, things would be different in Russia. They would see they would have seen the writing on the wall and would have had to do something, whether that was internal political change or crying uncle, for sure. Maybe not right away, but it would have gotten to that point because our support would not have wavered.
Are you surprised that at least so far Donald Trump has not lifted the sanctions? Or do you think even that's a bridge too far for him?
It seems to change almost every day, because some days it sounds like he is lifting some of them, and some days it sounds like he's not. In the end, it's quite clear that this regime here in America and those who have captured our government understand that they can profit enormously by the lifting of those sanctions and doing business with the equally corrupt regime in Russia. I think it's clear ultimately that that's what they are after, whether it is construction projects in Russia or gaining access to those minerals which are in Russian-occupied Ukraine. There are many, many ways that those who control our government here seek to individually profit off of bending the knee to Putin.
I'm talking to political science professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University. We are going to take a break and be back with more of this conversation in just a minute.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
You know, I'm talking to political science professor Joel Ostrow. We're talking about what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. Sometimes I have to start a discussion, Joel, by defining terms. So make sure we all understand what we're talking about. Sure. It's been reported that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have agreed to a partial ceasefire. Now, it seems to me that either you have a ceasefire or you don't have a ceasefire. I find this odd and confusing. Can you explain it to me?
Nope, you just did. You
so
just
it's not
explained
really a
it.
ceasefire.
Take out the really. Try again.
So it's not,
a ceasefire. Correct. Because immediately when Russia agreed to it, and Ukraine had already agreed to it, about 5 minutes later they unleashed something like 50 drones and missiles at Kyiv. And what does it mean not target? Is there a definition in there of what they mean by infrastructure?
Yeah.
Because
roads,
they got no intention
bridges,
of
buildings.
Yeah. Well, they're indiscriminately bombing cities. Yeah. So it's ridiculous to begin with, and even if there had been some kind of formal signing of this, the notion that the Kremlin would abide by it is absurd. President Zelensky in Ukraine knows that. All of the states in the European Union and the other members of NATO, minus the United States, understands that. Negotiating with Putin is meaningless because he doesn't live by anything that he signs.
So this seems to be a sop that Putin is throwing to his boy Trump so that Trump can crow loud and long that he brought about this partial ceasefire when it is, on the face of it, pretty meaningless. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I think that you're on to something there because after the farce of that Oval Office attack on Zelensky carried out by Trump and his henchmen, there was some whispers of discontent in the MAGA coalition in Congress.
Ooh, wait a minute. We have to spend more time on this. First of all, I saw what most of the rest of the world saw, which was a photo op that went thoroughly off the rails, but in a way that felt to me like it was orchestrated. With the J.D. Vance, Donald Trump tag team on Volodymyr Zelensky. When it was cameras were supposed to, guys, it was a spray, what's called a spray, which means everybody sits there, everybody smiles, cameras come in, they take everybody's picture, they take wide shots, and then the cameras leave, and then they were supposed to go to another room and actually talk.
Right.
So this happened.
They don't talk in those sprays.
No, you don't talk in those. Maybe you smile because even if it's your worst enemy, you smile. Oh, yes, here we are.
Infuriating reporting. Was it a setup? Of course it was a setup because that's not what happens in those photo ops. But anyway, this now gives MAGA cover to permanently cut off aid to Ukraine and fall in line behind their dear leader. And they can spread the disinformation to their brainwashed following that they tried and that it's Ukraine's fault that there isn't a ceasefire, when this was never a ceasefire to begin with.
But you said that after the debacle in the White House that there was some maybe dissension among MAGA. Talk a little bit about that.
There were. For your listeners, you already know this, Joan. I refuse to call them Republicans because any true Republicans have left that cult that's been taken over by MAGA. So anyone with the R in their label who's an elected official is MAGA. But some of them expressed unease. McConnell, for example, expressed unease with what happened in there, and a few others. In the Senate and the House, but they're pretty quiet because they're cowards. But what this does for Putin, and maybe it was a request by Trump to give cover for the propaganda machine, so that those cowards don't have to fear anything back home. The public was widely outraged because some of those right-wing members of Congress publicly express their displeasure and discomfort with what happened. So now the propaganda machine will kick in, and you'll see the numbers turn, probably.
I thought it was
that's
weird.
What dictatorship does.
At the end of the exchange, and this wasn't carried by. The sound wasn't carried. Maybe it wasn't recorded well. But Donald Trump looked away from Zelensky, not even at J.D. Vance, just sort of looked away and said, well, that's going to make good TV.
That's what they were after, yeah. And it wasn't in the moment, but they will come back to that when this absurdity of a ceasefire negotiation fails, to accuse Zelensky and say, see, we were right. And you'll hear that MAGA machine ramp up loudly, and Fox News and the others will fall into step.
Well, now that
and those on the Democratic side remain inept. In opposition, late, inept, and weak.
I know that you felt that when I spoke to Bill Foster yesterday, you didn't really feel that he was planting the flag in the way you would have liked.
No, he's terrified of the flag, or he doesn't know what a flag is. And shame on the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for that idiotic statement he issued today. He created the situation.
People are praising him, saying
he created the situation of putting the president above the law and eliminating the rule of law and emasculating the Justice Departments and delegitimizing the courts. It's him and his court. The members of the Supreme Court, if they cared about the Constitution, would be joining the former presidents and other leaders to publicly and jointly call for public action to bring an end to this end of our democracy and to restore some kind of democracy here. But everyone's staying silent. The Clintons are staying silent. The Obamas are staying silent. The Bushes are staying silent. Everyone's staying silent. And if you were to, it takes someone with leadership, and Governor Pritzker or your aides, if you're listening, it doesn't matter who it is. Pick up the phone and call these people and say, hey, we all need to do something together. It won't be the justices because we know what they are, but maybe the three who have some allegiance to our Constitution would participate. But it's going to take something dramatic like that.
That's one of the things that I, frankly, have been curious about.
There's a lack of leadership.
Is, and I even mentioned this to Bill Foster, why haven't we heard? This isn't, and everybody says, oh, well, it's a protocol that former presidents don't really weigh in on things they don't like about current presidents because it's considered, they had their time, now it's somebody else, and they should just, be quiet. But these are not normal times. This is not just a president who they disagree with on policy.
Right.
This is such
BS to protocol. It's not protocol for a president of the United States to tell our allies to go to hell and decide with our adversaries. It's not protocol for a president of the United States to violate the Constitution in almost every executive order he signs. It's not protocol to have an unelected billionaire running the destruction of our government institutions. It's not protocol to send private security into independent organizations, kick out the employees and fire them, and close the building, which they did to the United States Institute for Peace. They've done it to Voice of America. They've done it to other. These are government-organized but independent organizations that are supposed to be nonpartisan and free of government interference by congressional mandate.
So
it's not
where
protocol
are they,
for the
Joel?
president to ignore the laws of Congress.
What is it that is holding them back?
Lack of leadership and fear. Lack of leadership and fear.
What has Obama got to be afraid of?
His stock holdings declining, maybe?
Well, they're already tanking, and it looks like it's not going to get any better. Oh, I don't know. I can't see.
I don't know. I don't know what it is. Or there's still this blind faith in institutions that no longer exist. It's
if we just hang on, the ship's going to right itself. We're not going to have to.
I've told you before, people are talking about midterm elections. The White House, MAGA, doesn't care about the institutions. They don't care about Congress is a farce. They have ceded power. The Democrats have ceded unchecked authority to the White House, including the senior senator from the state of Illinois. If we had recall elections, I'd be leading the charge to get him out and to get someone else in, even though Congress no longer matters. But shame on Dick Durbin.
Well, I don't
Former chair of the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah. I don't think Dick Durbin is planning to run again. I think
no, but he shouldn't be another day in the Senate. What a disaster, and that's going to leave part of his legacy, unfortunately.
Yeah, well,
and all of them who supported it.
And I didn't even get around, we're out of time, I didn't get around to talking about Chuck Schumer, which is another person who's really made some interesting statements.
But all of the 10 who joined Schumer in signing for that continue. Again, it's a lack of courage, it's a lack of leadership, and it's a failure to imagine the reality that's happening. It's a repetition of Germany in the 1930s. I'm not saying there's going to be gas chambers, but there's certainly fascist dictatorship here. We no longer have the rule of law. And by the time the population writ large wakes up and notices it, it's too late. And that's the story of fascism and dictatorship throughout history, being repeated here before our eyes.
Well, let's hope. I think the people who listen to this radio station are certainly awake to it. Let's hope they can get friends and family on board. Joel, thank you so much.
Call on Pritzker to lead the effort, because what's needed is a nationwide general strike. I don't know if
you heard his remarks today. I mean, I think he's trying.
I did not. We need a nationwide general strike. It's all that's going to work. Everyone's got to stop going to work and school, go into the streets, and demand restoration of some kind of rule of law.
Yeah, I hear that a lot on the text line. There's a lot of support for that. Joel Ostro from Benedictine University, political science professor. Thank you so much, Joel. I really appreciate you taking the time. We are going to take a break. We'll be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Oh, I feel like the Wicked Witch of the West, as she's dissolving. Oh, what a world, what a world. and to that terrific world that we have seemingly created for ourselves, I'd like to welcome back to our radio station Jared Yates Sexton, author, political analyst. Jared, are you having the best day of your life today?
I can't stand how good all of this feels. It is just
too much winning. Woo!
So much winning. I'm so sick of it. There's no other way to put it. I'm just so tired of it.
I don't know if you heard any of the interview I just did with political science professor Joel Ostrow. He is an expert on Russia. Most of his academic career has been focused on Russia. And toward the end of the interview, he said quite emphatically that we are now living in a fascist state. Is he being too negative? At what point do we become the fascist state? We've got an executive who's out of control and hungry with power. We have a legislative branch that seems utterly incapable or unwilling to rein him in, and court systems that seem to be pretty easy to ignore. So, Jared, what do you say about that?
Well, I would say, depending upon what terminology anybody wants to fall upon, we are living in an authoritarian state. And, your previous guest, who is an expert on Russia, I think would agree with me that there is a moment where liberal democracy with enough corruption and with enough persuasion and authoritarian intent, it turns into an illiberal democracy. And in Russia, you have elections. You can't trust that they're real. You don't know what's happening. Meanwhile, you have this dictator who is enriching himself and the oligarchs around him. And unfortunately, we find ourselves in a situation very reminiscent of that and parallel to that for a large reason, because this is what they have wanted for a long time. They've looked at Vladimir Putin. They've talked with Vladimir Putin and people like Viktor Orban. They wanted to create a state that works just like this one, and they're currently in the process of making that happen.
I recently was reading a book called Tyranny of the Minority by Stephen Levitsky and what's Daniel's last name? Ziblatt. And it starts off by profiling democracies around the world that have fallen. Now, some of the countries they've recovered, you have Spain, Thailand, they look at. And a conclusion that they see from these examples of what happened and why it happened, I thought was really interesting, that it isn't the Orban, it isn't the Trump, it isn't the dictator, the would-be dictator who brings about a temporary or a permanent end of democracy. It is the enablers. It is the people, and in this case I would look at the legislative branch, the people who, at least on paper, had the power to object and to stop it, and instead decided that their bread was buttered on the side of going along to get along. And they call these people the sort of a low commitment to democracy. There's people with a high commitment to democracy and people with a low commitment to democracy. And if you're in elected office and you have a low commitment to democracy, you can convince yourself, well, I'm going to have to let this happen because otherwise I'm not going to get reelected. And isn't it important that I'm here in this position of power? That's really important. So I'm just going to look the other way. I'm going to vote for it. I'm going to sign off on it. And because, otherwise I will lose my job. And, I'm one of the good ones. It's kind of, they think how the whole mental conversation goes. And that really scared the hell out of me because that's what I see in Washington right now.
I want to make a point, which is when we think about authoritarianism, we've been fed this sort of conventional framing that suddenly somebody showed up and gave some speeches and they were so compelling that they, hypnotized an entire population. But actually authoritarianism breeds off corruption and inaction. And so what has happened over the past few decades is we have seen the corruption of representative government, both through money and politics, and people playing games with light authoritarianism, like getting rid of all regulatory state, feeding the oligarchs that are currently in control of things tens of billions of dollars in government contracts and support and refusing to regulate them. And while this happens, eventually you reach a point where what you just brought up, it is the psychological component of the people who enable these things. On one hand, you have a group of people who don't want to lose their seats. On another hand, you have a group of people who truly believe that representative government is dangerous and it makes us weak and vulnerable, which is always the sort of psychological component of the authoritarian. And then you have another group of people who are in complete denial about what's happening, that don't fight against it, that don't push against it, that don't resist against it. And they continually retreat and retreat and retreat and leave this open vacuum that can be gobbled up by authoritarians who recognize the opening, they recognize the corruption, and they seize the moment when they have the chance.
Some people are suggesting, to play into that last point you just made, that the way you break down institutions is, like, for instance, the Khalil, the man who led the Columbia University protests, who's in this country legally, has a green card, and yet was ferreted away by ICE agents because he was leading these protests, and the Trump administration didn't like that. So even though he had absolute legal standing and supposedly a right to free speech, he was taken away. And the argument is that you start by breaking down, like, say, the right to free speech by starting with people that, well, like Khalil. Some people would say he's fighting for a cause that Americans don't like and don't support. And so then the debate becomes not just free speech or the fact that somebody is a legal person in the United States being taken into custody. The debate then becomes whether or not you agree with what he was protesting about. In other words, start with the people who are on the fringes. And then once you've set the precedent that they can be removed and put into custody somewhere and their rights violated, it's not that big a leap to do it to other people. Thoughts on that?
That is 100% correct. What is happening, and this is always what happens in authoritarian societies, they start cracking down on what they call the quote-unquote undesirable criminal element. There's a reason why the hundreds of people that were just sent to El Salvador to a nightmarish prison, including, by the way, a bunch of people who didn't commit crimes and were mistaken for members of a supposed gang, those types of things are designed to take advantage of any of these sort of cleavages that we're talking about. And you brought up Mahmoud Khalil, which is an absolute embarrassment to this country. And because I respect you and your licenses and radio in general, I won't say what I think about people like Chuck Schumer, who have absolutely failed to stand up for someone who is a constituent of theirs. But we start to see these inroads being made against people that the people who should be standing against authoritarianism, they decide, well, I don't really want to waste my political capital here. I don't want to go out on a limb for somebody who seems a little dangerous or maybe is controversial. And eventually what happens over time, as more and more people are sacrificed, it's almost like we're in a circle. And that circle is constantly shrinking and getting smaller. And you start with the outliers, and then you move forward, and eventually they're going to make their way to everybody else.
Yeah, that's it's some scary stuff. Jared, we need to take a quick break. I'm talking to Jared Yates Sexton. We are going to continue our discussion right after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
And I am joined by Jared Yates Sexton, political analyst, author of the book The Midnight Kingdom, A History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis. His past book was American Rule, How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People. Both of those books, Jared, are way too timely right now. I would, it'd be nice if we could say, oh, yes, that he wrote that in a different time, but we've come through that now and we're so much better. If anything, I think we're getting worse, Jared.
Yeah, and when I wrote those books, it was in the last few years, and the subtitle of the last book, The Midnight Kingdom, is the history of power, paranoia, and the coming crisis. What we're dealing with right now is that crisis. It is, as the crisis gains steam and momentum, there's still a lot to come that we could necessarily get past and avoid. But the problem here is that we have had years to stop this rolling crisis, and now we're here, and it's time to look at what it is, look at it in space, understand what it is, how it's working, and what the solutions are, and take some action before it gets much, much worse.
One of the things that I want to talk to you about is what Democrats should be doing now. I've been reading, if Democrats just attack Trump, they're going to be making a big mistake. Oh, no, Democrats have to be out there attacking Trump every day. Oh, no, Democrats have to be telling the personal stories of people who have been hurt by these policies. What do you think? What should we be doing? What should we be saying? Who are our leaders?
Joan, it's very interesting. Hearing you lay it out is actually very exhausting, isn't it?
Oh, my God.
The Democratic Party in recent modern history has been the most neurotic, hand-wringing group that is constantly worried about being seen as too far left, too progressive, of being called bad names, of being called radical. Meanwhile, by the way, they're still called all of those things regardless of what they do. And the issue here is that the Democratic Party has effectively become a conservative party. What are we told now? The best that we can do is to contain the damage that's being done. And yeah, we're going to lose some rights and privileges and some social programs, and maybe we might even lose big chunks of the Constitution, but we need to conserve what we can. The problem here is that the Democratic Party has stopped giving people a vision of the future that could be better than what we have and better than what we have had. And so right now, number one, the Democratic Party needs to get over itself. They are most worried about the billionaire donors that aren't contributing in the same way while they're neglecting the base. The vast majority of America that actually agrees on all of these issues and is looking for leadership. And so what I want to see some moral and ethical courage. I don't want to hear from the strategist. I don't want to hear about the apparatchik. I don't want to hear all these people who are in all these meetings that are trying to figure out the perfect message. Say what is true, say what is real, and say it with passion. Because right now there's a crisis going on, and the way that they're treating it is downplaying it. They're playing possum like James Carville wants them to do, or they're helping the Republicans pass what they want to pass. The entire point here is that they have to take a stand. They have to be courageous. And quite frankly, it would be even politically beneficial for them because the vast majority of America wants them to actually stand up and fight.
Yeah. I have been keeping a list of people who I think are trying to do a good job. When you look at the current Democratic elected leadership in Washington, who stands out to you? Anybody?
Well, you look at the people who are absolutely failing this moment, like a Gavin Newsom, who thinks it's a good idea to pal around with Steve Bannon, and that's the best direction.
No. Let's stop right there. You're a strategist. What was the strategy? What was the upside of that?
The literal belief is that somehow or another, if the Democratic Party moves right, that they will continue to, and this was the same strategy behind the Harris-Walz campaign that brought out Liz Cheney and thanked Dick Cheney for doing such a service to the country. And in truth, what's actually occurring is that you have a small minority of the Democratic Party. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proving herself to be a leader. Bernie Sanders is continuing to stand up for what's right. And I'll tell you the truth, I think Tim Walz has afforded himself in a really, really laudatory manner that we need to pay attention to. So
well, he's getting out there, and he said he was going to hold town halls in areas where Republicans refused to do it. I'd like to see more of that.
Absolutely. And this is one of the problems is that the Democratic Party for decades now has gone ahead and accepted the Electoral College map. And, I'm from the state of Indiana, and, they've basically written off the state of Indiana. And I need to remind people that someone from your state, Barack Obama, who I might remind people was a black man, won the state of Indiana, which was controlled by the Ku Klux Klan in the 20th century. And so the entire point is that they have to give up on this trench warfare style of politics, popularism or moderation or whatever they want to call it. People want bold leadership that actually points towards a future as opposed to this authoritarian past. And I think that that will benefit the party if they actually find their courage and actually unmoor themselves from these restrictions.
I, like you, am a big admirer of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I know that in the beginning of her tenure in Congress, she kind of got off on the wrong foot with Nancy Pelosi, who by all accounts felt that she was too idealistic and not pragmatic enough to get any of her ideas actually into laws or policies. And frankly, that estrangement seems to have continued, when she threw her hat in the ring to be the minority leader of the Oversight Committee, and Nancy Pelosi threw her weight for Jerry Connolly, who is, I am not ageist. He can be an old white guy and still be cool. I think Bernie is. But this is a guy who has battled what many people consider to be a terminal cancer and is currently battling that. And he was the choice that Nancy Pelosi wanted over AOC. And people told me at the time, Jared, oh, don't sell him short, man. He's a fighter. You're going to be so surprised by him. Where's he been? I'm sorry. I haven't seen him anywhere. And, I don't even want to say anything about that because who knows, maybe he's in the midst of another round of treatment and things are going well. So it's not like I want to say, he should have been there, but he hasn't been the leader that AOC would have been. And frankly, even without any official recognition, she continues to be. And I think, tell me what you think about this. There are some far left progressives who never seem to me to develop the pragmatic side of politics. They want what they want, and they want it because they think it's the right thing, whether or not they can get the votes for it, but they're going to not compromise because it's the right thing. I think she's mellowed. I think she has become more realistic and pragmatic. Is that just me, Jared? What do you see?
No, and to be honest with you, I think AOC has played the game for years now. She actually took a bunch of slack from the left for endorsing Joe Biden. And that entire thing, she has shown that she's willing to do this. But the issue here, and it doesn't have to be ageism. It doesn't have to be about the age of leadership in the Democratic Party. It's actually more about control over the party. And we have seen for years now that the Democratic Party, and say what you want about Bernie Sanders, we don't have to get into a debate on whether or not he would have won in 2016 or in 2020. What happened around the party in response to the popularity of Bernie Sanders reveals the larger problem, which is that leadership would rather hold on to the power and the control over the party rather than try some things that might destabilize their hold on it. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, both of them have said multiple times, we need a strong Republican Party. We believe the Republicans will wake up. Well, you and I and all of your listeners know at this point, that's not just wrong, it's delusional. It's living in a past era that has gone completely out the door. We're dealing with an explicitly anti-democratic party at this point with the Republican Party. They want to hold on to things so much that they have actually stifled any sort of innovation that could have helped this party evolve and actually meet the challenge of the moment. And that has been the case whenever you see entrenched power throughout history. But it just so happens at this point, it's come at one of the worst possible moments that it could have happened.
So that we do seem to be at a time where maybe we can't get together to focus on Trump because we can't seem to get together to focus on who we are or who's going to be leading the charge or what it's going to look like. What is the end? Do the old people like me, Jared, just have to die? Is that the best solution here?
Well, Joan, I'm not going to sit here while you say that the Democratic Party is in disarray. This has been one of the large markers of the Democratic Party for decades now. And it isn't, again, I don't think it's necessarily generational. I think it has to do with the fact that leadership, particularly when it comes to Schumer and Pelosi and the others around them, and Joe Biden was one of them, They created the structures that eventually led to this moment. And I don't know how old necessarily people are going to be. You can have an older representative who recognizes that change needs to happen. That they fully grasp
you're
what
absolutely
is occurring.
right, because even though he's far older than I am, Bernie Sanders has always had the support of a younger demographic. And it isn't because they like the way he looks or because he can, deadlift 150 pounds. It's because they like the things he says and the way he says them. He says the things that people think, and he says it in a way that is straightforward. I mean, so many, I think Adam Schiff is very bright. I think Chuck Schumer is very bright, but they talk like college professors. They don't talk I feel that their fire has gone out, and it's, that's one thing that I think is ageless, is passion. And that's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for somebody with the right message and the right passion. And who is that, Jared? Who's that going to be?
Say, as a former college professor, I can tell you that there is an issue with the fact that the Democratic Party does not really know how to talk to normal people. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to express those things and to raise up that passion. The entire reason that Trump was able to gain power outside of white supremacy and patriarchal supremacy was that there was something that he told the truth about, and him and Bernie told the truth about it simultaneously, which was something had gone wrong in the United States of America, and people were looking for a change.
Yes.
It just so happened that he changed the direction of who was responsible and blamed a bunch of vulnerable communities instead of the wealth class that was funding him and continues to fund him. The entire point is that the vast majority of Americans are desperate for a new direction. They recognize that the wealth class has absolutely screwed them over. They recognize that something needs to change. If somebody can articulate that, they can admit that mistakes have been made and they're authentic, which is not the strong suit of Democratic leadership.
No.
If they can do those things, they can capture a vast majority of the American electorate. You just have to have the courage to try.
What do you think about Chris Murphy?
Chris Murphy, and that's the wildest thing about this is there are a lot of people who are showing real potential by meeting this moment where it's at. Chris Murphy, to me, seems like he gets it. And the question is whether or not he would be able to be some sort of a figure, whether or not he has the charisma to get it done, whether or not he has the full understanding of what needs to change. But he is one of the Democrats that I have seen over the past few months, particularly post-November, who seems like they're starting to wrap their heads around what the situation is. So, there's a very, very small list of those Democrats who have actually done that, and Murphy is definitely on that list.
Yeah, he's somebody who really wasn't on my radar before the world started to come apart at the seams. And I first noticed him a couple of months ago. He did some interview. He was just outside. I don't think it was a press conference. I think it might have even just been something he recorded to post to social media. And he looked at the camera and he was like, "Where are the Democrats? Mm-hmm. Where are the Democrats?" And I remember he was the first person in elected high office to echo what me and all of my listeners had been saying for months. Why is everybody so quiet? Why, and then we saw Maxwell Frost leading people over to, I don't know whether it was Treasury Building, another building they couldn't get into. And then, Illinois' Jonathan Jackson with Maxine Waters. Yes. Yep. Doing the same thing. And it seems like elected officials are waking up very slowly, but I don't think the grassroots is going to let them go back to sleep. Jared, I want to talk to you more about this. We have to take a break for news. I'm talking to Jared Yates Sexton, political analyst. We'll be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Jared Yates Sexton has written a couple of books, The Midnight Kingdom, A History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis, which, by the way, that crisis is no longer coming. It has arrived. His past book is American Rule, how a nation conquered the world but failed its people. You know, we were talking, Jared, before the news about a few voices that have emerged from high levels of Democratic leadership in surprisingly positive ways. What do you think about Governor J.B. Pritzker?
You know, Pritzker is one of those people that has struck me for years as being a little bit of an outsider within the Democratic Party, and he's not as beholden to all of the donors because of his own personal wealth. I've liked the fight that he's brought to things. I do also think we were discussing in the previous segment moral clarity. And, you know, while everyone was laying low and hoping that Donald Trump didn't mention their name or focus on them, I thought that Pritzker made it very clear, you know, I'm going to stand up for what's right. And if I take some blows from the federal government because of it, so be it. And I think right now what's being revealed is character. We're realizing who people are and whether or not they're going to stand up for what's right or wrong. And I think so far Pritzker has afforded himself very well.
Speaking of character, part of the reason that you just said J.B. Pritzker was perhaps a little more emboldened to stand up to Trump is because of his great personal wealth and his family's personal wealth. And yet, I could argue that Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, they actually have a great deal of personal wealth themselves, and yet they seemingly have capitulated every chance they've gotten. Are they really so afraid that the companies they run will be destroyed by Trump? Even if Trump went after Meta, they would have them tied up in court long past any Trump administration. What are they so afraid of?
I would go ahead and say that I actually don't think they're afraid of anything. I think they're in on it. And I think this idea that they've capitulated or in some way or another cowered away from what Trump is doing, I think takes the focus off of this isn't about Donald Trump. It's about a group of oligarchs that have slowly monopolized the American economy and also have designs on monopolizing the world economy. And quite frankly, what's happening through Elon Musk, who is effectively running our government as Donald Trump does one spectacle after another. And we all know that he's not well and that he is also being manipulated in all of this. I think it's very clear that what we're actually dealing with here is an oligarchical coup. And we've seen that. We mentioned Russia earlier. We've seen it around the world that people like them are using their power and the wealth because they despise democracy, and they're part of a larger tech oligarchical class that is trying to effectively take over the government. So I think it gives them too much credit to say that they're afraid. I think that they are complicit, and I think that they collaborate, and they are part of the group that is carrying this out.
Well, that's a much darker view than mine, and I thought mine was pretty bad. But, you know, I do agree with you. I mean, it seems that, to be kind of crude about it, that they look at Trump as a useful idiot. I mean, he can clearly be bought. Oh, I don't like electric cars. Well, wait a minute. Let me give you $200 million for your campaign. Oh, you know, I love electric cars. I mean, it's like I don't like crypto. Oh, wait, you guys are going to give me money too. I love crypto. And then he finally was just completely upfront about it when he when he had the oil executives and the oil lobbyists down to Mar-a-Lago. You know, you guys are all rich. You know, get together, come up with $1 billion, billion with a B, $1 billion for my campaign. And I promise you, like, I'll be getting rid of regulations. I'll make your lives so much easier once I'm in the White House. I mean, he's a useful idiot, and he's a transactional guy. And why wouldn't they take advantage of that, I guess?
Well, that's exactly right. And when I'm trying to explain this to people, and because we're the United States of America, it's hard to wrap our heads around this because we have this aggrandized view of ourselves. And I always invite people to imagine that it's taking place in another country. And you and I picked up a paper or looked online and read an article. And I want people to imagine that what has happened in this country is taking place in some foreign country. And you realize that there is a complete and utter fool who is a big, giant clown. And around him are all of these wealthy people who are actually pulling the strings. We wouldn't have a problem understanding it in that context. we would know that this person is a tin pot dictator who is being controlled by wealthy individuals and corporations. So Donald Trump is it's the equivalent of trying to understand McDonald's by understanding Ronald McDonald. He's not actually in charge of the corporation, everybody. He's the one that shows up at the kids' birthday parties. There are a lot of other serious people with a lot of serious plans who are actually carrying things out. And to spend all of our time focusing on Donald Trump is to miss the larger threat that's actually facing us.
Did you make that reference because Melania wore the Hamburglar hat to the inauguration?
No, but I constantly think about the fact that Donald Trump wants to be the mascot of America. And we even know in the past when he was elected in 2016, he offered John Kasich control over domestic and foreign policy. Like, he is not actually a person with his own personal beliefs outside of an instinctual fascism and an endless drive to enrich himself. The rest of it is just left there to be taken advantage of. And for the record, Elon Musk and the people around him, including Peter Thiel and all these other tech oligarchs, they effectively bought MAGA from Donald Trump when J.D. Vance was placed as the VP, and Trump's positions on everything you just brought up have changed. And what makes it even more absurd, he sold the presidency of the United States of America for a few $1 million. It should offend everyone and make everyone realize how venal this person is, how cheaply he can be gotten, probably the most corrupt politician that we've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I want to get into a discussion about J.D. Vance, but we will have to take a break. So rather than interrupting ourselves, Paul, let's take our break now. And Jared Yates Sexton and I will be right back after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
And joining me is Jared Yates Sexton. You should read his most recent book, The Midnight Kingdom, A History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis. J.D. Vance. Okay, Jared, I'm going to go... if borderline QAnon here, okay, let me give you the theory. The theory is Donald Trump is a useful idiot, that the people like Peter Thiel and Bezos and Musk knew that for a very small amount of money, they could buy him, they could manipulate him, they could get him to do whatever they wanted to do. He was their little puppet. But the real plan was to get J.D. Vance in a position to take over, whether that means that because of his age and poor eating habits, that one of these days Donald Trump just keels over, or assuming Donald Trump doesn't completely become a dictator, that J.D. Vance is perfectly poised to run in 2028, and that the real end game was J.D. Vance, who is almost literally their own creation, particularly Peter Thiel, who has shaped J.D. Vance for years. Okay, please tell me I'm crazy.
Not even a little bit. You have it dead to rights. And for the record, when it comes to 2028, if we're still having free and fair elections we can trust, I have little doubt that if Donald Trump is still breathing, that he will run for re-election. I simply think that is, you can put your money on it. But I do think what has happened is that MAGA, as a faux populist movement, that, you have a group of people who have been inducted into a cult around Donald Trump, they recognize that this was one of the most profitable endeavors that they would ever even come across. And I do think what you mentioned, and I think not enough people know about this, but J.D. Vance has been personally groomed by Peter Thiel and his associates since he became an adult. He has worked for Peter Thiel, and if people don't know who Thiel is, he is another one of these tech oligarchs who
made his money on PayPal, didn't he?
Yes, working with Elon Musk. And in all of this, for someone like me who has been studying Peter Thiel and these tech oligarchs and these authoritarians for years, I need to make it clear, I'm not making a guess that they are anti-democracy and want to destroy it. All you have to do is listen to their own words. They have been very open about this. They haven't hidden it at all. It's only because our mainstream media has largely ignored it and the Democratic Party hasn't wanted to touch it. But I do think that it is not just likely that J.D. Vance has been put in place to be the successor to Donald Trump. I think it's a near certainty. This is a person who has taken tech oligarchical authoritarianism and has made it his entire political ideology. He is a servant of these people, and his place of power at this point, it leaves no doubt what it is that they want to do.
So if Donald Trump has some sort of severe medical emergency, J.D. Vance is elevated to the presidency, will he simply continue on? Will he let, Elon continue to take apart the government? Will he sit back and enjoy that? Will he be the same or will he be different? And if you think he'll be different, how?
Well, I'll say this. I have been involved in my own personal feud with J.D. Vance for 8 years now, and I've studied him the way that you have to study anybody who is a threat. And I will tell you this. He is a cold-blooded snake. This is a person who has had no compunction about throwing his entire family, his own mother, his community underneath the bus in order to make a profit. If you are looking at our current political alignment, and if in some way, shape, or form Donald Trump is taken off the game board, and if J.D. Vance assumes the presidency, all I can tell you is that what we are watching right now, there will be no brakes on it. It will accelerate, and the brutality and the cruelty behind it will only escalate to a point that it's almost hard to fathom. This is an incredibly dangerous person, and the fact that he is this close to the presidency and with a president who is not in good health, it should worry everyone. So this is just to underscore, it isn't to make people afraid, it's to talk about the reality of the situation and to emphasize that we ourselves have to take collective action in order to stop this and to mediate any sort of danger that is coming, because there is quite a bit of it.
So you have no hope that if he were to be elevated to the presidency, J.D. Vance, being in that exalted position, would feel enough power to separate himself from his very wealthy backers, should there be something he disagrees with?
J.D. Vance would throw his own mother under a bus for a free cup of coffee. I mean, this person is absolutely has the psychological and personal components of someone who has not just embraced authoritarianism, but he has made it its entire worldview. It's the frame and the lens that all this goes through. What we saw in the Oval Office with Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump, that entire thing, it wasn't a coincidence that we saw J.D. Vance as the attack dog who sent this over the edge. This is not a person who will moderate. This is a person who will take advantage.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was worried about. My partner, who used to come from the world of finance and foreign exchange, was telling me about somebody by the name of Curtis Yarvin, this guy who used to be considered just an incredible right-wing fringe wingnut, who believes that democracy doesn't work and that what we need is like a king, but the king should be like a tech bro because, they're really good at everything. And supposedly, from what I've read, J.D. Vance, Mike Johnson, Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk have at times Elon Musk at one point said that Curtis Yarvin was his really good friend, which was interesting because we had a discussion about Curtis a couple of weeks ago, and I was doing research, and Curtis Yarvin made an appearance somewhere fairly recently, and he was like, yeah, I don't know the guy. Yeah, I read about him. Maybe our paths have crossed, but I don't really know the guy. And this was the guy that Elon Musk said, yeah, we're friends. We're good friends. But it's not a good basis for a thriving democracy to have somebody like that in power.
I've studied Curtis Yarvin for 8 years now, and based upon my expertise and my course of study, anybody that I spend that much time on, I hope to God that you never learn their name. And the fact that Curtis Yarvin is the main ideological figure behind all of these people, the entire reason that he has become so important, and I want to make it very clear, it's not just that, he might see democracy as dangerous. He sees liberal democracy as something that needs to be erased. And his plans and his ideas have been put into motion by this administration almost to a letter. So what we're actually talking about is a person who has given a larger philosophy to people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, the people who currently control the government, in order to make them feel better about their authoritarian, anti-democratic moves. And if you look at what he says, he talks about Caesarism, dictatorial presidents, all of it. Like, it is not at all hidden. And this has been the main driver of the ideology that is motivating the people who currently control the government of the United States of America.
Do you believe that a lot of the problems we're having now come from wealth inequality? From my reading of other countries, if there's one condition that leads to political unrest, it's wealth inequality. Wealth inequality was what gave us Castro in Cuba. You had the very few, very rich, and the rest of the people, there wasn't even really much of a middle class. It was the poor. And so when somebody suggested throwing the current elected officials out, there was a lot of support for that. We now have incredible wealth inequality in this country. How much has that one factor gotten us where we are now?
100%. It is the main point here. What we're actually dealing with at this point is essentially a class war. We have reached this point because during the neoliberal years from 1980 to now, tens of trillions of dollars were intentionally redistributed from the working and middle classes to these people. Then in the 2000s, we had both parties just plunging tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars onto these people in order to do things like carry out our space program or to run the empire surveillance network. What we're dealing with now is the same thing that we dealt with in the 1930s, in which the industrialists of that era, you know who they allied themselves with? Hitler, Mussolini, and other demagogues. So what ends up happening is when you have a wealth class or an oligarchical class like the one we have now, they always predictably turn against democracy. It's only logical for them. But this is 100% the problem that we are dealing with. Everything else is a component of it, and we are essentially in a class war right now.
I do know that there were very wealthy people who supported Hitler and, did their best to keep the United States out of World War II. But the difference was that they did not have the backing of one of the two major political parties. They were loud, they were wealthy, but they were not as mainstream as the current MAGA group is. And that's what scares me. It's the fact that there are so many people in a position to stop this that are basically looking the other way.
Yes, and what you bring up in terms of that era, one of the reasons why America didn't become a fascist dictatorship, and there was an opportunity for it to happen. In fact, the Nazis and the fascists gained a ton of inspiration from America prior to World War II. It was one of their shining stars in how they created themselves. We had Franklin D. Roosevelt in the New Deal, which was essentially a way to get rid of the authoritarian appeal within the country by creating social safety nets and investing in these things. And the industrialists that we were talking about, the Peter Thiels, the Elon Musks of that moment, they despised him. They attempted to overthrow FDR in order to make America a fascist country. And if you take a look at how that dynamic took place, the answers are obvious. What needs to happen is a New Deal type program that reinvests in the country, that gives people something to believe in, that pushes away this income inequality and class warfare that you and I are discussing, and actually puts things right again. The problem is, like you said, we currently have a government that is not just complicit, they're collaborating. We have to be able to create something of a counterbalance through collective action and hopefully a Democratic Party that recognizes the call of history.
I want you to talk to me in the time we have left. I want you to talk to me about the midterm elections, because I hear people say, everybody's so upset. It's going to be a blue wave, and other people saying, oh, no, especially in the Senate. Yeah, there are a lot of seats up, but they're hard red districts. So, who knows? We might not win anything. Give me your appraisal of what we will see in the midterm elections.
Well, the first thing that I would say is that for anyone listening, I would not put stock in there being free and fair elections in 2026. Regimes like this tend to fix those elections. We've seen it in Russia and other countries around the world. I believe that people need to react right now outside of the electoral process in terms of collective action in order to even ensure there will be elections. And for the record, it's not just that Trump and the people around him are causing these problems. We're also seeing massive cover-ups. They're not just cooking the books and getting rid of the numbers that tell us how bad the economy actually is. They're getting rid of things like NOAA that show us how bad the environment is. They're taking over HHS in order to take away any sort of the statistics that could show the diseases that they're enabling. The entire point is this. We cannot simply believe that their failures or their overreaches are somehow or another going to inspire an electoral backlash. We have to represent a popular backlash. And I think we have to stop looking at 2026 and 2028, and we need to look at today and tomorrow.
Come on. The midterm elections are only 500 some days away. Come on, Jared, we can't degrade that much, can we? No, I refuse to believe it.
Well, I think we're 50 days in on this regime, and we're already seeing the Constitution put in the shredder. So I think even though these 50 days have felt like the 2 years have already passed and we're ready to go out and vote, I think we need to leave an opening for the fact that they are going for it. And when an authoritarian takeover like this begins to pick up speed, they never pump the brakes. They have already sort of cast the die. They have already gone into this gambit. They want to see this thing come to its full fruition. I don't think we can trust them to not pull out all the stops.
Jared Yates Sexton, author, political analyst. His books are The Midnight Kingdom, A History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis. And his book before that was American Rule, How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People. Jared, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to talk with you. And I hope that we are on the airwaves for the foreseeable future and get a chance to do it again.
Joan, I always appreciate talking to you, but here's to a time in the future where we don't have to talk about such awful things. I would really like that.
I would love for us to come through this and you and I have a conversation about the best movie you just saw or the most fun book you just read. Let's hold on for those days.
Well, I just want to say very quickly, Joan, what you just brought up is something that we need to remind ourselves of in this chaos, which is a life outside of it. We have to hold on to the hope that we can find our way on the other side. We can't just believe that this is inevitable, and I will hold on to that hope, and I hope your listeners do as well.
Jared Yates Sexton, always a pleasure. Thank you, my friend. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
You know, earlier today when I was taking calls, I got a first ever call from Iowa. Remember, I got a call from Dubuque, Iowa. Dan called me from Dubuque, Iowa, talking about how they had moved to Dubuque, that unlike the reputation most of the state has, it's a blue area, and Dan talked about the things that he is going to be doing to try to not only keep Dubuque in a bluish area, but try to bring about more democracy, more Democrats for the rest of the state. What a great day to talk to Zachary Smith, who's the political correspondent at the Iowa Starting Line, which is a digital publication of the Courier Newsroom. You can read it at iowastartingline.com. No spaces. Zachary, how are you today?
I'm well, Joan. How are you today?
Well, that's a good question. Monday and Tuesday are usually pretty rough because I've found my joy over the weekend, and then Monday comes and I realize that not only is all the bad stuff from the previous week happening, but there's new bad stuff. It's like a tsunami of bad stuff.
Remember, tomorrow will be worse.
Yes, exactly. So, today's looking pretty good, I guess, when you give that frame. I wanted to talk to you about one of your articles, and not just because there are two very attractive cows in the picture. About, I've talked about this so much, about how farmers across the nation, it's like they forgot how Donald Trump made their lives difficult in his first administration. They forgot because, according to the demographic breakouts, a lot of rural areas, a lot of farmers voted for Trump. And now they're like, wait a minute, this wasn't supposed to happen. So tell me what's going on in Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, forget for a second, right, the impact of this administration's tariffs have had on things like potash, right, a really important commodity for fertilizer. Forget what it's done to rising prices for agriculture equipment. Last week, I was reporting a story where cuts of the USDA under the Trump administration have led to $11.3 million in cuts to local food right here in Iowa. This is, and I need to be very clear here. This is money that has been promised to farmers, right? Money that farmers had planned to use to invest in future equipment, in future major infrastructure improvements. This is stuff that is paving the way to get food to the last mile, right, of distribution. A lot of this food, by the way, is meant for that because it's tied up in this USDA program. Is creating markets for local food in school districts. So this is food money for food that was going in, for the mouths of students here in Iowa. That all of a sudden we learned the Trump promises made by the Trump administration and promises revoked at the last minute after all these farmers have already decided to depend on it.
Stephen Colbert, the late-night host on CBS, said that people had forgotten how much they disliked Trump in his first administration and that we were just going to have to sit back and wait for them to relearn it. Where would you say the farmers in Iowa are in that process?
I think it's complicated, right? I think on one hand, this is real harm, right? It is spring planting season right now, right? There are plants going into the ground right now. There are meat lockers, right? There are farmers who have booked out meat lockers, right, to process their poultry, to process their beef, to process their pork. That already been booked. They're already planning for it, and all of a sudden, this money that was going to help get these commodities to the next step of the process, suddenly getting yanked out from under them. So, on one hand, right, I think farmers are seeing real pain, right. On the other hand, I live here in Iowa, and I see the media. I see the kind of the way that these decisions get mediated, right. I see how they get blamed on anything other than the folks pulling the levers on them, right? So, I don't want to pretend like I got a cheery story about how political outcomes are going to, find purchase with voters. I see bad outcomes. I see bad outcomes that are, may even be rewarded at the ballot box. Joan, it's really hard for me to understand.
I've heard people speculate that it's like if you make a bad decision, if you admit that you made a bad decision or that you made a bad choice, you have to live with that shame or with the negative consequences that come with that, which is why they said a lot of people who voted for Trump and then were the ones who I didn't think he would do this. I didn't think he would hurt me. I didn't, the usual, that we shouldn't expect those folks to say, oh, you know what? I made a serious mistake. I never should have voted for that guy. Rather, it said it's the way human psychology works. It's more likely what you just said, that people are going to double down. The reason why this is going on, anything to do but Trump. I still, I'm 100% Trump. Yes, I'm losing my farm, but by God, I made the right choice for America. Do you think that's what's going on?
I mean, maybe that's right. I mean, I will say that, if you live in these communities, I do think that the Trump campaign, at least in its messaging, had a narrative that a lot of folks found a lot of meaning in. Right? There was, to some extent, this is the story, at least for in Iowa, right? How we've become increasingly, year over year, we seem to put more and more Republicans into office. And there's, I think the local Democratic Party has been, working to try to make a better case for why it is that, the state with a progressive history, right, should be, maybe return to, return in that direction. But right now, I mean, I do think that even while clearly the Trump administration is not delivering on the kind of kitchen table issues that it claimed to these voters to be pursuing, I do think that they're back before the ballot box, right? That this was that messaging was really effective with my neighbors. It's really effective with folks I run into at a gas station.
I saw a clip when Tim Walz and Kamala Harris were still campaigning. Tim Walz was sitting down. One guy, I don't know if they were all farmers or two farmers and one guy with a small business, and it was just a spontaneous conversation, but it really struck me. Even though you think of the governor of a state as being somebody sort of highfalutin, Tim Walz really could talk their language. He understood where their concerns were and what they wanted to happen. It was just such an eye-opening conversation. And I remember seeing that and listening to that and thinking, oh, my God, this is exactly what the Democratic Party should be doing. People who understand what a farmer's concerns are and can say, are you getting the help you need? If not, where would that help be? What would it look like? Because, I want you to succeed. It was really a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the challenges that a lot of Democratic candidates are running into is there's like I grew up in Mississippi. I've lived in Iowa for the last 8 years. There's a code of language that I think a lot of I kind of associate with 08 Obama, right? That it's this it's very smooth, it's very polished, it's thoughtful, it's great for like an NPR show, right? It feels almost like cut from the cloth, but it doesn't sound like folks from around here, right? It sounds it sounds like it sounds processed, it's deep and it's soothing, but it doesn't sound like this place. One of the things that I've been really proud of my work and the institutions that I've worked for has been that we live here, right? Yes, we have progressive values. Yes, we believe that we can do a lot better for not just our farmers, but also our teachers, our union manufacturers, folks from Dubuque, like Dan, you mentioned, all the way to Sioux City. But that's got to come from places like ours, right? That can't come from the DCE consulting class. That can't come from folks, folks that that pronounce the town of Nevada, right? They may be spelled the same, but damn it, there's a difference.
Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of human touch that I think people are crying out for in politics. I have to ask you, this is. I'm tapping your expertise right now. Of all the people who could have resisted Donald Trump and survived, I thought Joni Ernst was in the perfect position. She let it be known, of course, not through anything that, she didn't trash him, but she pretty much let it be known that she did not think Pete Hegseth was a great or even a good candidate to lead the Department of Defense. And Elon Musk brought his money to bear, and she caved. And I thought she's popular in Iowa. People like her. I thought if anybody who could stand up and say, by the way, folks in Iowa, you're going to be seeing a lot of billboards. Elon is out to get me, but I did what I thought you would want me to do. I did the right thing. I thought she could have done it, and she didn't. And do you think she did what she needed to do to survive?
Collapses, it feels like the right word. We saw right before the Hegseth. I mean, you're right.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Zachary, I'm sorry that I rather abruptly went to break. We have a computer that we should lovingly rename HAL because it sometimes makes decisions on its own and switches control rooms and it keeps us on our toes. And I'm afraid Hal got you on that one, Zachary.
Not the first time I've had Kane drag me off stage. Won't be the last, though, Joan.
So you were talking about Joni Ernst when Hal so rudely interrupted you. So please continue.
Well, I'll be brief here, right? Since it feels like in Trump time, that was 2 years ago. It feels like.
Yeah.
But I think Joni Ernst had a really principled case, right? She's done so much on sexual violence within the armed services. She's done so much. I mean, she's been very open about her own experience of sexual assault and violence. She's really good on these issues. But then I remember when I first saw Charlie Kirk, right, the conservative influencer, tweet beginning the kind of pressure campaign against Joni Ernst and her kind of slowing down this confirmation process, right? Charlie Kirk got involved. There was just because I like to stay on top of it. If you tune into Steve Bannon's War Room, right, all of a sudden Joni Ernst is is in the crosshairs of some of the guests that he'd bring on. And this, what happens when this kind of far right. What happens when the grassroots, farthest to the right actors begin fomenting about a rebellion? You begin having rumors about Carrie Lake has connections to Iowa. Is she gonna why don't we bring her back to primary Joni Ernst? All of a sudden, there becomes real concerns about Joni Ernst's future. And if there's something that Ernst is really good at, it's reading the room. And she saw which way it was going. She got one. I think she got one kind of upper level staffer added to Hegset's cabinet, right? Kind of focused on some of her issues, but that's the most that our senator from Iowa was able to accomplish in all this.
Wow. Anyway. I also want to talk to you. Iowa has gotten some national publicity for this proposal to do away with DNA vaccines, like,
right.
The one that is used against COVID. That seems insane. Tell me about that.
One this is focused on particularly on mRNA vaccines, messenger RNA vaccines. This was the technology like you mentioned. This was the these have been in research for decades, but really came into the kind of popular imagination with the majority of the COVID-19 vaccines that are in use today, things like Moderna, but it's also the technology being used right now in some really groundbreaking cancer treatments, right? I mean, this is really next level stuff. But it's as is true with seemingly every kind of novel technology. There's some the tinfoil hats come out. We begin kind of associating it with any number of conspiracies. So we had a bill Iowa Republicans pushed forward a bill during this session that would have basically banned the use of the technology on patients here in Iowa. And the way they did this, rather than banning it outright. They didn't want to say that we banned that vaccine, so the way they did was they would criminalize someone for administering a vaccine, right? So if you're one of the if you're a Walgreens employee who's administering a Moderna vaccine to a patient, sorry to tell you, that's suddenly a serious misdemeanor.
But it's
remarkable.
It's just that. It's like a QAnon-y thing. This, I know that there are people who believe that the COVID vaccines are some sort of some sort of deep state plot. And
Right.
but I thought that those were kind of fringe ideas. This is in the state legislature.
This is in the state legislature, and importantly, right, there are bizarre bills that get introduced every session, right? Leadership in the Iowa legislature, they have the ability to kill a bill, right? Just because it gets introduced does not mean it gets a subcommittee, does not mean it goes to a committee level. What leadership decided to do, though, was give it a subcommittee. There's some excellent ideas. Things like making it so that every K through 12 student, when they come into school, that they have a free lunch waiting on them, right? We could be doing that as a state, but instead, the thing that gets the subcommittee meeting is the bill to criminalize administering mRNA vaccines to patients. It's remarkable.
Do the people of Iowa think this is okay and normal, or do how many share your and my opinion of this, that this is bat poop crazy?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that I spent a lot of time thinking about for our outlet, right? I fundamentally believe that a large part of our issue here in the state is that if you want to go read about what's happening in what your city council's up to, what your state legislature's up to, there are actually relatively few places you can go. I sit in the newsroom here at the Capitol every morning, and I see how our numbers have dwindled over the years. If you want coverage, wall-to-wall coverage of the state legislature, there's just not a singular or even multiple outlets that you can follow that's going to give you the full kind of narrative of the legislature. And therefore, you're going to miss out on what I think are some really important details that the leadership, Iowa Republicans' leadership, is allowing for, frankly, crackpot ideas to find, to give them space, to give them purchase right here in our auspices. I think it's a media. Of course, media is a media hammer is going to think everything's a media problem, but I fundamentally feel that it's something that Iowa Starting Line, our publication, does a really great job of, right? Which is making sure people understand that, hey, this isn't normal.
Yeah. Really, I like Charlie Sykes' newsletters. There's always the secondary headline: "You are not the crazy ones." Every day he runs, "You are not the crazy ones." Zachary Smith doing great work in Iowa for the Iowa Starting Line. Thank you. And if this mRNA bill keeps moving forward, we've got to talk again.
I'm happy to tell you right here on the air, Joan, it is dead. It is dead as disco, but it certainly could come back again.
Well, thank you. Thank you for talking with us. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure, Joan. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. That's going to do it for me today. I told you that the astronauts who have spent 286 days when they were supposed to spend, I think, 8 or 10 on the space station, they are now returning to Earth. Their capsule is just about to touch down in the water. It's going to be a while before they're up and about. As you know, no matter how much you exercise in space, you lose bone, you lose muscle. And after 286 days, they're going to be pretty wobbly for a while. But it looks like their return to Earth has gone very, very smoothly. That's going to do it for me. Tonight, Patty Vasquez is going to be joined by Wisconsin radio personality Ben Caminos and comedian Jamie DeLeon. Always fun times on Patty's show. Richard, of course, will be here tomorrow at 6 a.m. He's going to be talking to Cheryl Johnson, among others. She's the executive director for People for Community Recovery. I will be here tomorrow at 2 p.m. Remember, tomorrow from 4 to 5, it is the WCPT Book Club. We are going to be doing the next chapter on Spencer Critchley's new book, The Liberal Backbone. You can go to dastardlycleverness.com, dastardlycleverness.com, to read the current chapter. Have a great evening tonight, my friends. Find a little bit of joy. Tomorrow it's Wednesday. The week's practically over, right? Have a great evening. Good night.